those caveats in mind, we're left with two instances of virtually identical conduct. In one case, that of J. Michael Bailey, in the other, that of Andrea James, one of Bailey's most vocal trans critics. Alice Drager, in her lengthy defense of Bailey, describes James' conduct as a, quote, disgusting, quote, end quote, unethical, intimidation tactic, rendering James, quote, not the sort of person who is good for a scholarly institution, nor the sort who is good for trans rights. Interested readers will search in vain for such harsh terms to be used to describe what Bailey calls, quote, what Drager, rather, calls Bailey's alleged treatment of transsexuals in his book. It is important to reiterate here that the question is not whose conduct deserves what degree of condemnation. Unless one believes that trans women, as a class, deserve less dignity and respect than professors' children, that question is easily disposed of. Rather, the question is, what do these two substantially similar cases tell us about the nature of the academic freedom Bailey and Drager are committed to defending? This is a particularly instructive case because Bailey's conduct is treated as a protected exercise of academic freedom, whereas James' parody, to use Drager's own term, is a violation of the same freedom. Clearly, there must be some crucial distinction that leads these two examples to fall in completely opposite ends of the spectrum of Bailey-Drager academic freedom. Certainly, it cannot be the fact that James' conduct was not scholarly in nature and did not seek to assert or establish a matter of scientific fact. Neither James nor anyone else has claimed that her conduct was intended as an assertion of scientific fact, and Bailey has been at great pains to disavow any attempt to create a work of scholarship on his part. Nor can it be the content of James' captions or Bailey's book. If anything, if the judgment were based on content alone, James' captions, which make no factual assertions, were retracted and taken out of circulation and were intended as parody, would be trivial in comparison to a work that makes as categorical scientific fact similar assertions about an entire class of people. Similarly, it cannot be a question of the relative innocence of the victim. Trans women, as a class, were not asking for this sort of treatment any more than were Bailey's children, nor can the crucial distinction be a matter of choice of words. If anything, James' use of slang and expletives makes it clear that the assertions are not meant to be taken seriously as a matter of fact, whereas Bailey's prose further seeks to lend the authority of science to his labels. Yet the one, to return to Drager's description, is a disgusting, unethical intimidation tactic unbefitting a scholarly institution and damaging to trans rights to academic freedom, while the other is merely a permissible, protected exercise of academic freedom. Having exhausted all content and style-based possibilities, we're left with matters of status. Bailey is a tenured academic at a respected institution, who is thus accorded the privilege to define and categorize. James is a trans woman, worthy only of being the object of the definitions and categorizations bestowed upon her by the guardians of received knowledge. James' conduct upsets the order of things. Bailey's is the order of things. This order of things becomes clear as we move on to another instructive episode for our analysis of Bailey-Drager academic freedom. In the course of the investigation by Lynn Conway et al. Into The Man Who Would Be Queen and Its Making, Bailey was accused by one of his research subjects. I'll use the term since he uses it repeatedly in his book, even though he's distanced himself from it since, for obvious reasons. Who has come to be known as Juanita, of having had sexual relations with her. It bears repeating at this point that we're not concerned here with the accusation itself, which Bailey has, albeit equivocally, denied, but with what the Bailey-Drager treatment of the accusations tells us about the nature of Bailey-Drager academic freedom. In his search for material to include in The Man Who Would Be Queen, Bailey posed as a clinical psychologist evaluating trans women for sex reassignment surgery approval letters. While he was not at any relevant time licensed to practice as a clinical psychologist in the state of Illinois, he was able to avoid legal sanction for practicing without a license because he did not receive payment in exchange for services as required by the relevant Illinois statute. In this context, he became acquainted with Juanita, who has since accused him of having had sexual relations with her. Bailey addresses the accusation in his Academic McCarthyism, note the title. Because it's so instructive, I'm going to just read his response in its entirety. Sex with a quote-unquote research subject. This charge was clearly intended to embarrass me rather than to protect a research subject. The complainant was, after all, a prostitute. I offered 2 responses. First, there's nothing intrinsically wrong or forbidden about having sex with a research subject, and I insist that Juanita was not a research subject. Some of my colleagues have had sex with their research subjects because it's not unusual to ask one's romantic partner to be a subject. Even if Juanita's complaints were true, there is nothing wrong with what she claims, but her complaint, in scare quotes, mind you, is not true. The alleged events never happened. If I ever needed to do so, I could prove this, but there's no reason why I should. Now, of the 125 words Bailey dedicates to Juanita's charge, only 30 are dedicated to actually denying that he had sexual relations with her, with an additional 10 dedicated to denying that Juanita was in fact a research subject, or apparently a complainant, since that's his work for scare quotes as well. We need not tarry on this material. Ultimately, whether to credit the accusation or the denial is a credibility judgment, and Bailey has provided more than enough material for interested individuals to reach their own conclusions on his credibility. What is, however, of interest in Bailey's response to Juanita's charges are his more general assertions on the propriety of the conduct of which he's accused. We begin by noting that the complainant was, after all, a prostitute, and therefore, apparently, is forever estopped from objecting to or claiming to have been harmed by any sexual encounter, ever. I think that's kind of familiar. I've heard that someplace. Having reminded readers of the complainant's all-important status, he proceeds to inform us that even were Juanita a full-fledged human being with the attendant rights of sexual autonomy, it is perfectly right and proper to have sex with one's research subjects. Indeed, he informs us he knows people who have had sex with their research subjects, quote, because it's not unusual for to ask one's romantic partner to be a subject, end quote. Thus, for the purposes of determining what conduct is protected by Bailey-Draeger academic freedom, there is no difference between asking one's romantic partner to participate, say, in a memory study, and posing as a clinical psychologist, providing unlicensed evaluation services in that guise in order to glean intimate details about one's patient's sex life, and then, having established the relationship, thusly having sexual relations with one's unwitting research subject. Nor does it make any difference that one's posing as a person with the power to grant or deny access to a treatment the unwitting research subject/patient desperately needs. Indeed, the overall context of the relationship, of whatever sort it may have been, with Juanita is so irrelevant that the question of the propriety of Bailey's conduct to the question of the propriety of Bailey's conduct, that he does not even address it. Nor does he address the propriety of having sex with a person with whom one has a clinical psychologist-client relationship. Though it seems reasonable to take his silence on this issue as an indication that this conduct, too, is protected by Bailey-Draeger academic freedom and therefore immune from criticism. And if the complainant is a sex worker, the matter is clearly not worthy of even that cursory treatment. That's not to say there's nothing objectionable or harmful about such matters. However, as Draeger points out in her defense of Bailey, perhaps we should keep things in perspective. The public criticism of the man who would be queen and Bailey's conduct in producing and marketing the book, quote, came remarkably close to effectively destroying J. Michael Bailey's reputation and life, end quote. Whether the publication of a purportedly scientific book branding all trans women as lying erotomaniacs might have had psychological, personal, legal, and professional consequences for trans women, on the other hand, is irrelevant. Under the Bailey-Draeger doctrine, consequences only matter to the extent that they harm worthy victims. Thus, it appears that whether trans women as a group are in fact entitled to the same level of dignity and respect as professors and their children is a matter of some controversy after all.